Hello everyone, I'm Dennis from Boulder Sounds. Thanks for joining us on this walkthrough video of our new sample library for Kontakt called Mandola. This is the Mandola. It's the middle voice of the mandolin family. The bottom voice of the family would be the mandocello, in the middle is the mandola, and on top would be the well-known mandolin. It's basically the same as the viola in the bowed string world. It's tuned starting on a low C in fifths, C, G, D, A. It's got this really nice full-bodied mid-range sound to it. And if you do some research to try to find a sample library of this instrument, as of today, there isn't one that I know of. Long ago, 30 years ago, when I first started sampling on an Akai S1000, I did sample a mandola along with its mandocello and mandolin brother and sister, I guess you could say. That was back in the days when a sampler had 8 megabytes, maybe 16 megabytes of RAM, and you would save the samples off to floppy disk. Well, things have changed since then, so I thought I would return to this instrument and give it a thorough sampling so you might have it for your musical palette. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so we have two panels. We have the instrument panel and the effects panel. And off to the bottom right here, we have the various drop-down menus. So right now we're on the front page. I'm going to go to the settings page. This is really where all the action is. So let's begin with this default mode right here. Right now it's set on normal. We also have a choice of articulation 1 and articulation 2. So normal is what you might expect. It's just the normal sound of the mandola being played with its natural notes. Now, if I choose articulation 1, what I can do now is go over to the articulation settings column, and I can have it always play with these various parameters. I can have a slower attack. So for example, notice that has a little softer edge to it right away. So this is a good way simply to work on getting different articulation settings, which you can trigger via key switches if you wish, or you could just use this sound all the time. And the parameters we have available, we have the attack speed, sample start, so it starts a little ways into the sample, which darkens the attack a little bit. And we have the curve of the attack envelope. So at extreme setting, if I bring this up, obviously you're not going to use it at that setting, but just an example. So this is set at 15 milliseconds fade in. Notice it has quite a bit of a softer attack. If I return to normal, and I'll explain that later on using key switches and show you how you might juxtapose one of those articulations against a normal sound just for variety. But we'll get there later. So now on the settings page, let's look below where it says default mode, and we have that switch that said normal. Below that it says auto position off. So in order to understand this, you have to understand what a position is. If you play a stringed instrument, especially a fretted stringed instrument, you'll know what we're talking about. But let me just show you a diagram to help facilitate this. On the left is what we call zero position. It's a span of 7 half steps. We consider that one position. As we move down the mandola, the positions advance up the neck. On this particular instrument, as well as the mandolin, we have 7 positions to choose from. So when you're playing down here in the first position, or excuse me, what we call zero position, the sound is going to be very bright and crisp because you're using some open strings and the vibrating string length is fairly long. As you proceed up these different positions up the neck of the mandola, the sound will get warmer, a little more muffled, but the point is it's a completely different sound quality. So what happens here is, if you're, say, a keyboard player, you don't know anything about stringed instruments, what I would suggest you do here is you turn auto position on. So what that will do, it will intelligently follow your playing, and when you step outside one of those zones, it'll automatically switch to the next zone. So it'll work in a way that a typical string player would think. They play on certain areas, they kind of move down a little bit, they might move up a bit. Those zones will shift intelligently for you. If you really want to have full control and you understand how this stuff works, and you play these stringed instruments perhaps, or have knowledge of them, you have complete control over them. So we'll leave that off. And down here on the bottom right, we have different positions that can be obtained by key switches, okay? And that way you can control wherever you're going to play on the mandolin for any part of a piece of music. Now, you also have control over imposition of a string, meaning if you just want to play up the C string as long as it was sampled, we can do that. And then you can shift over to the next string. So you can play up the length of a string, or you can play in a zone. It's entirely up to you. We'll get more into the details of that later, but that's the concept. Okay, still on the settings page. By the way, the settings page is where all the action is. It says velocity layers. We have a drop-down menu, all layers. Click on that and you'll notice you have different options below that, but right now we'll just use all layers. So the mandola was sampled at 3 velocity levels, and that includes downstrokes and upstrokes as well as multiple round robins. The reason you're only seeing 2 layers marked here is because we assume that the first layer starts at velocity 0 and goes all the way up to, for example, 75 in this particular case. Layer 2 triggers at 76. Layer 3 is marked at layer 110, meaning the end of layer 2 is actually 109. And layer 3 is triggered at a velocity level from 110 up to 127. So if I wanted to change this, lower this threshold here, I could just hold my mouse down and you can see I'm going to have layer 2 set now at 61 or 60, and then the velocity layers will now go from, the first layer will go from 0 to 59, the second layer will be 59 up to 109, and the third layer will go from 110 all the way up to 127. So you're basically choosing different velocity mappings according to your needs and the way you play. Now, if I use that drop-down menu, I can also say, oh, I just want to hear layer 1 samples, period. And that will give me layer 1 or the softer samples. Right, quite a bit warmer. Let me contrast that with layer 3, should be quite a bit more brash and bright. And so on, and you can choose whatever combinations you want. If you like to hear just layers 1 and 2, you don't want to hear the third layer at all, you have that option. And you have these other options below it as well. So that's just going to give you a lot of tonal flexibility in your choice of sound. Okay, let's move to the tremolo section of the settings page. Notice it says lock. Below that there's a button that says tremolo lock off. If I click that, it turns it on. What will happen now is any note I play on the keyboard will automatically be tremolo. If I turn that off, I have to hold down the corresponding key switch for tremolo, so I might use this when I'm playing a single note passage and then I go into tremolo. Okay, I'll leave that turned on for now for sake of simplicity. Now below that we have a knob which tells you which continuous controller number is controlling the tremolo. Right now it's set to number 1. If you want to change that, just spin the knob to whatever you need. Below that is the range. This is an important knob. So right now with my mod wheel set at its 0 position or lowest position, I have this volume. And as I move that, listen to what happens. I will increase the mod wheel. So it gets a little faster and also a little louder. If I want wider dynamic range, I can go all the way up to 100%. If I went there when my mod wheel's at its minimum value, I won't get any sound, but I just barely move it, it'll be very soft. So I could get a really wide dynamic range that way. And I kind of like the setting near 100 personally. If I want the global speed to be just slower in general, right now it's at 104, I can just turn that down. This would be quite a bit slower now. But notice as I increase my mod wheel, it gets faster and a little louder. Okay. Below that, we have an increase knob. What that does is that increases the amount of speed that the mod wheel will introduce. So if this is on 8 right now, if I speed it up, let's go up to 15 or so, and I'll gradually increase the mod wheel. So notice it's getting quite a bit softer, and then all of a sudden quite a bit faster and louder. Below that, we have a timing knob. This is just a randomization knob if you don't want your tremolo to be quite so perfect rhythmically. Right now it's set at a default of 8. It has a little bit of error scripted into it. We could bring it up to, let's say, 15 or 18, and the timing of the tremolo should be a little more off now. But the whole idea is to make it sound human, right? None of us are machines, yet anyway. Below that, we have a sus pedal knob. This is, I think, important. So what this does is, for example, when I play a tremolo note and I release it, notice there's some reverb there on the sound, but the release is a little abrupt. If I hold down my sus pedal right before that last release, has this nice ring to it, and you can decide with this knob how long that is going to ring for after the release. So let's move over to the articulation settings on the settings page. We have 2 articulations we can set up. Notice the first column, Art 1, the attack is set to 15 milliseconds. Art 2 across from it is set to 34 milliseconds, so it's a slower attack. And also below those we have sample start settings. So if the sample starts playing a little bit into the sample, it will also have a slightly darker sound. Art 2 is set up a little more into the sample, and Art 1 is set up just barely into the sample. But how you might use this is if you use your articulation key switch. So watch down here in the lower left hand corner. When I press this key switch, it says I'm using articulation 1. When I press this one, articulation 2. So let me just do a simple passage. I'll play up a scale with no articulation settings. Here's with Art 1. Here's Art 2. So they're very different sounding, right? So this way you could get a lot of variety in just basic scale passages that will make it sound less mechanical. And it's very subtle, but I think it's very effective. And last but not least, on the settings page, we have a string mute knob here. So when I trigger that key switch, we get this sound, like the mandola player has his palm resting on the strings to mute the strings. And you can change the amount of muting. So if we want less than that, and if you took it all the way down to 0 or 1.0, it's still muted, but not nearly as much. So let me show you some of the key switch assignments. Down here in the bottom left are green key switches, and right above it in the display here, it'll show you what the key switch represents. So this first key switch is a slide up in half steps. Okay, slide up in whole steps. Hammer on in half steps. Hammering is when you throw another finger down on the string when there's one already down. It's a different sound than a slide. It's a little more percussive. Okay, hammer on in whole steps. Pull off in half steps. Same idea, but descending now. Pull off whole steps. Hammer on and a pull off. So this is an upward movement and then pulling to a downward note. And this is half steps. This is more of an ornament. And these are round robin sampled. So if you play the same ornament twice, you'll actually get a different sample for variety. This is the same thing with a whole step. Okay, now, if you go to the ornaments page, you'll notice when you trigger an ornament, for example, right now I'm triggering the hammer-on whole step, it highlights, and there we can change the speed of the ornament, the sample start, have the sample start more into the sample for a little darker sound, or even the attack speed on the sample. So let's listen to this one. So if I need that to slow that down a bit, I can just take the speed and crank it down a bit. Sample start, I might darken it by going into the sample a bit. I might soften the attack. So a lot of variety on programming the sound of the key switch ornaments. One other articulation we have here are sampled harmonics, which I neglected to mention. If you should need them. I'd like to give you a little taste of what these different fretting positions do that are located as key switches here in the upper right part of the keyboard. So I'll begin in 0 position, which is kind of open position on the mandola. And I'll play a sequence, and when it repeats back to the beginning, I'll go all the way up to 7th position, which will be a drastic tonal change. And it should demonstrate that well. Seventh position. Third position. Back to first position. Seventh position. So you see, that 7th position fingering actually wouldn't be possible in the real world. But I suppose since we're in the world of virtual instruments, we have that tonal possibility to create. Let's move down to the key switch page just to show you the options here. So here we have all the key switches listed. On the Kontakt virtual keyboard here, anything in blue cannot be moved, but anything else can be reassigned to a different position. So if you don't particularly like the layout of it, you can move any of those key switches anywhere you want outside of where they're mapped. Okay, and below the key switch page, we have the About page. This is kind of a condensed manual built right into Kontakt. It was written by Bo Clausen. Bo is my Kontakt programming, scripting superhero. Our libraries would not be what they are without Bo. I do the grunt work, and Bo polishes it and makes it all shine like a diamond. He's sort of the brains of the outfit, and I'm the brawn. Hard to believe, but I am. Anyway, Bo, I thank you for your work so much over all the years. I really do. And all the users of our libraries also appreciate so much what you do. Okay, so now let me go very quickly to the effects panel. I know you guys know all about this stuff already. So on the effects panel, we have all the effects listed on the right-hand side of the page. If you just want to go to an effect and edit it very quickly, you just click on the button, boom, and there it is. You can set your parameters. You have different, in the reverb setting, for example, you have different reverbs to choose from. You can edit your sound as you wish, and then you can save your own presets as you tweak them. So, or you can save an entire bank and then load them back up. So it's very useful. We have all these. So the reverb is Kontakt's built-in reverb, which is a little more CPU efficient. We have space IR convolutions. We have all these choices: ambience, chamber, church, hall, plate, and room. You can tweak those and then again save them as a preset and use them for future work. So something just slightly off topic. I every now and then get emails from people who are writing music for the instruments that I've sampled. They ask me, how do I get a more realistic voicing of the instrument? I'm a keyboard player. I don't play the mandolin or the mandola. So what I do, and this is how I work. By the way, when I'm playing these video demos, I play the keyboard very poorly. I don't think about how is the instrument fretted. I just simply can't do that because I'm not a good enough keyboard player. But when I'm making demo sequences and I take my time, this is my approach. So what I do is I map out the mandola in whatever key I'm playing in. So for example, here's the mandola open string, C, G, D, A, and then I map this out in the key of D. So all my Fs are sharp, all my Cs are sharp. Then if I want to say, okay, what is a legitimate voicing of a mandola if I strummed it down for an E minor chord? Okay, well, I would choose this E. I have this B right next to it. I have this E. And where's my G? Well, that doesn't work so well. Well, how about this? E. I can play open G, which is up here. I can play E and B. So what does that give me? It gives me E, G, E, B. What does that sound like? E, G, E, B. That's an actual voicing on the mandola if you were to strum an E minor chord. And it sounds convincing. Let's do another one. Let's say it's D major. So D, A, F sharp, A. D, A, F sharp, A. It sounds like a real chord there because I've voiced it correctly. So that's just a suggestion. You might try that and see how it makes your sequences sound. It's a bit tedious, I understand. It takes time to do it, but it's worth a try. Thank you for watching the video on the Mandola library for Kontakt, and I don't know if you made it to the end. I know these are long videos. It's very difficult to demonstrate a very involved sample library like this in 3 minutes. Maybe someday I'll learn to do that, but probably not. But anyway, best wishes to you from Boulder Sounds. Take care.